Hello, in this section we're going to go through and talk about surveys, including why to use a survey, general survey design, as well as some brief information about reliability and validity. We're going to go into a lot more detail on reliability and validity next week, but this should be enough to allow you to do your discussion and kind of understand the foundational aspects of it. So to start out with, why use a survey? So by studying a sample of a well-defined population, a survey can provide a quantitative description of trends, attitudes, and opinions of a population. It can also test for associations among variables of a population. So those are kind of the two main reasons of why we would use a survey. Survey designs help researchers answer three types of questions. So there's three main types of questions that you would answer with a survey. So descriptive, just what percentage of leaders support remote work. A relationship between variables. So for example, are transformational leaders more likely to support remote work? And a relationship between variables over time. Are transformational leaders more likely to support remote work since the pandemic compared to before the pandemic? So those are the three main survey design types. Let's actually look at that in a little bit more detail then. So for types of survey design, we've got time of data collection. The first is a study over time, which is longitudinal, or a study at one point in time. So for your dissertations, if you use a survey, you're likely just going to use this study at one point in time. The reason for that is that it's a lot quicker. If you were to do the longitudinal option, that means you would have to collect data over multiple semesters, and I think most of you would rather get done with your dissertation sooner rather than later. Yet, outside of Cumberland and outside of your dissertation, if you were collecting data over time, and now remember, this is for survey. So let's say if you were using secondary data, you might include longitudinal. For my own dissertation, I actually had 3 different time periods that I was comparing data and changes. So I had pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic. But it wasn't a survey, it was secondary data. So if you are doing a survey, you are not going to be comparing over time, you're going to be using cross-sectional. So for cross-sectional, that's just one point in time, so you give out your survey once, and you could be studying attitudes and practices, group comparisons, community needs, a national survey potentially, or program evaluation. So those are some of the main types of survey design based on the time of data collection. So how do you design a survey method plan? So this probably looks crazy. I'm not going to read through all of this. I just want to show you that if you do a survey for your dissertation, this is what you will be kind of writing out. This is what you are going to have to go through and explain and justify before you actually collect your data. So you'll need to make sure that you have all of this thought through, and you would need to make sure that you have good answers for these. A lot of this even has to be answered for your IRB before you even get approval to collect your data. So designing a survey method plan is mission critical because the best designed plan is going to end up being the best designed data when it comes to your results. Because if you've got that plan and it's solid and you've thought through everything, then when you get your data back, you're going to have good results, right? So good in, right? Good in gets good out. So really important to have a solid survey method plan. This is mostly just for dissertations, so if you plan on collecting data via a survey, but I wanted to include that here just for any of you who were planning on using a survey. So now let's talk about the research instrument. So the research instrument is the tool used to collect, measure, and analyze data related to your research interests. That can include interviews, tests, surveys, or checklists. So for those of you maybe who are doing qualitative, you might end up doing interviews. For those of you doing quantitative, a lot of you will probably use surveys and secondary data to collect your information. So those are just your research instrument. So for example, your research instrument could be the survey. It could be your interview protocol. So the research instrument is usually determined by the researcher and is directly connected to the study methodology. So basically what that means is whatever your survey plan, whatever your survey methodology is, it has to be clearly connected, and there has to be a good reason for then using the specific research instrument that you are using. So characteristics of a good research instrument. First of all, valid and reliable, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. It needs to be based on a conceptual framework or the researcher's understanding of how the particular variables in the study connect with each other. You are going to learn when you do your dissertations that the conceptual framework is really important in terms of both your lit review, but then how you determine what research instrument you're going to use. You must gather data suitable for and relevant to the research topic. This is why in many cases, even though you might know that you want to do a quantitative or a qualitative study, they don't actually kind of make you, I guess, formally declare that, so to speak, until you get to the actual, you get done with your lit review. Because sometimes your lit review, you might think, oh, I want to do quantitative, but then you go through that lit review and you realize, oh, I really need to do qualitative. Or maybe vice versa. You're working through that lit review and you realize, hey, I really need to do quantitative instead of qualitative. So as much as you normally do decide as part of that lit review, like, hey, you normally, most of you know already what you want to do, you really should make sure to gather data suitable for and relevant to the research topic. And that involves kind of going through that lit review and making sure that the methods that you're using are appropriate for the type of data you're planning on collecting. A good research instrument also needs to be able to test hypotheses and or answer proposed research questions under investigation. I've worked actually with a few students that what they wanted to know, their research instrument wouldn't actually provide that answer. Now that doesn't mean we couldn't make it work, but it's really important to make sure that the instrument that you pick really will answer the test hypothesis or the proposed research questions. It also needs to be free of bias and appropriate for the context, culture, and diversity of the study site. Mission critical as well. And then also contains clear and definite instructions to use the instrument. So you need to be clear, how does this test need to be administered? Because for some, there are some pretty specific directions. So depending on the survey that you would use, you need to make sure that you both understand the directions and that you follow the directions when you collect your data. Okay, so you know what? I'm going to actually pause this now, and I'm going to go into reliability and validity in a separate video.